The valleys and bluffs that encircle the tranquil Little Bighorn River occupy a unique position in American history. On a sweltering afternoon in June 1876, this location became the backdrop for the final stand of George Armstrong Custer, the renowned Civil War veteran and celebrated general of the United States. Custer was characterized by his impulsive ambition and rapid ascent through military ranks. He presented a striking image in his Army uniform, known for his flamboyant fashion choices. Additionally, he was a notable self-promoter, likely having more portraits taken of himself than nearly any other American of the 19th century. Custer took great pride in his accomplishments and ensured that his successes were widely recognized. The nation was profoundly shaken by the news of the massacre. The prospect of defeat at the hands of Native Americans was a startling reality during an era marked by progress and prosperity. Custer's tragic demise captivated the public's attention. The mere mention of the battle evokes vivid imagery that encapsulates the spirit of the Wild West. Rolling hills, painted Sioux warriors, and courageous federal soldiers striving to tame the frontier. This battle has inspired a multitude of literary works, epic poems, and Hollywood films, and the fervent discussions surrounding it persist. The American government perceived the indigenous peoples as a significant threat in this region of the country, primarily due to the need to protect citizens, particularly non-Indians, as well as to safeguard those indigenous individuals who were allies of the United States. Consequently, the government sought to confine Native Americans to designated areas known as reservations. These reservations were considerably smaller than the original lands held by indigenous peoples, yet they were established through treaties that promised the land would be theirs as long as the grass shall grow and the water shall flow. However, this promise was often disregarded, particularly following the discovery of gold and the subsequent desire of non-Indians to settle in these prosperous areas. This raises the question of how such a seemingly minor engagement gained notoriety and why Custer and his 200 troopers from the 7th Cavalry met their demise on the hills of the Little Bighorn. Custer's critical miscalculation at the Little Bighorn stemmed from his failure to ascertain the actual number of indigenous warriors he faced. He, along with the majority of the U.S. Army, underestimated the Native American forces, believing they could not muster more than 1,500 combatants. In reality, the Sioux, Cheyenne, and Arapaho, encamped at the Little Bighorn, had gathered over 6,000 warriors, creating a numerical advantage of more than 10 to 1. Faced with such overwhelming odds, Custer had little chance of success. As we revisit the battlefield, we follow the path taken by Custer's men. George Armstrong Custer remains one of the most colorful and contentious military figures of his time. Custer gained widespread recognition across the continent for his valiant deeds, particularly during the Civil War, when he became the youngest U.S. Army general in history. However, he was not initially inclined to excel academically. During his time at West Point, he was more focused on practical jokes and romantic pursuits. Although Custer received his education at the Army Academy at West Point, it was during the Civil War that he truly honed his tactical skills. He discovered that his unique approach to warfare was effective in specific Civil War engagements, particularly in cavalry charges, where he achieved notable success. Custer's reputation soared rapidly during the Civil War, as he was commended for his bravery in his very first battle and demonstrated audacious brilliance at Williamsburg, subsequently coming under the mentorship of General McClellan. He was quickly promoted to the rank of captain. A pivotal moment in Custer's career occurred following his significant involvement in the Battle of Brandy Station in June 1863, when the Federal cavalry finally triumphed over the previously formidable rebel cavalry led by Jeb Stuart. His troops admired him greatly, often mimicking his flamboyant style by donning red neckerchiefs. The media affectionately referred to him as the Boy General, and he reveled in the surge of fame, with his image widely circulated and civil dignitaries eager to commend him. During this period, Custer also fell in love with the enchanting Libby Bacon. Despite facing a chilly reception from her father, the couple married in early 1864, appearing to be the ideal pair. However, the end of hostilities in April 1865 brought numerous challenges for Custer. Life was exceedingly monotonous for a man of action like him, and his considerable ego was bruised as attention shifted elsewhere. He appeared to be a man forgotten by time, Moreover, with the advent of peace, his rank was diminished to that of merely a captain, a deeply humiliating setback. In May 1866, Custer accepted the role of lieutenant colonel in the 7th Cavalry Regiment, seeking to reclaim his former prestige through a different form of conflict: the struggle against the Native Americans of the Plains. Custer embodied the prevailing attitudes of his era, holding racist views that were common among many North Americans regarding indigenous peoples. This mindset was prevalent throughout the Western world, where white settlers often believed that native populations would inevitably yield to their presence, as seen in Australia and New Zealand. Maintaining his characteristic blend of audacity and discipline, he enhanced the appearance of his regiment and introduced the Irish jig Gary Owen to be played as they charged into battle. The subsequent years witnessed Custer engaging with Native Americans in a brutal fashion. Winter campaigns and dawn raids resulted in the destruction of villages and food supplies, the slaughter of horses, and the targeting of women and children. Actions that the commanding General Sherman ominously labeled as a final solution. This phrase would later acquire a horrific connotation in the following century, yet the human toll at that time was marked by the same inhumanity, indifference, and genocide. The federal government deemed it necessary to confine the indigenous peoples to reservations, and the only means to achieve this was through military force. The attitude of the United States government toward the native tribes during this period was one of disdain. By the 1870s, a great tragedy had already befallen them. As the white settlers advanced westward in pursuit of their manifest destiny, rights and lands were relinquished through insincere treaties and deceitful practices. Railroads traversed their territories, and the vast buffalo herds, essential for their survival, were systematically exterminated, nearing extinction. The official policy aimed to confine Native Americans to federal reservations, where they would reside in permanent settlements, receive government rations, and be more easily managed than if they continued their nomadic lifestyles as hunter-gatherers. This policy naturally met with significant resistance, particularly from the Cheyenne and Sioux tribes. Following a series of minor confrontations in November 1868 at Fort Laramie, the government ratified a peace treaty that designated a large portion of what is now South Dakota as the Great Sioux Reservation in perpetuity. However, this arrangement was essentially a peace dictated by the white settlers. To enforce the treaty, a demonstration of military strength was deemed necessary, leading to a brutal campaign to round up and suppress tribes residing outside the reservation. General Sheridan turned to Custer for this task, recalling him from a year-long suspension for going AWOL and ordering the execution of deserters without trial. Custer maintained a close friendship with General Sheridan, who spearheaded the military campaigns against Native Americans during the 1860s and 1870s. Sheridan played a crucial role in ensuring Custer's appointment as commander of the 7th Cavalry. Custer was acutely aware that his career relied on the support of influential figures and took great care not to alienate those who could impact his professional trajectory. In December 1868, Custer's troops, marching to the tune of Gary Owen, attacked a Cheyenne village along the Washita River. The regiment was strategically divided, encircling the village and cutting off any escape routes. The term war is too noble for this shameful incident, as only 11 of the 103 fatalities were warriors. The remainder included young children, women, and defenseless elderly men. Nevertheless, the soldiers returned triumphantly, displaying the scalps of their victims as if they were true warriors returning from a legitimate battle. To further disgrace an already unfortunate situation, Custer was accompanied by a Cheyenne translator. Regrettably, despite her considerable beauty, she was unable to communicate in English. Custer epitomized the ideology of manifest destiny, a belief held by many white Americans that the entirety of North America, from the Atlantic to the Pacific, should belong to the white population. He perceived the indigenous peoples as obstacles to this vision, concluding that their inability to assimilate into white society rendered them unfit for survival. Consequently, he advocated for the extermination of Native Americans, viewing this as a form of natural selection. If they could not endure, they would not endure. The Black Hills, known as Pahasapa, represent the spiritual heart of the Sioux Nation, a sacred area where warriors sought divine visions. Although the government had previously dismissed these lands as worthless, rumors of gold soon emerged. Custer's expedition in 1874, ostensibly tasked with identifying a location for a military outpost, included mineralogists who confirmed the existence of gold deposits. This information spread rapidly through eastern cities, leading to an influx of illegal prospectors in the area. Towns like the notorious Deadwood emerged, established in blatant violation of treaties and with the Army's tacit approval. Consequently, Custer earned the reputation among the Sioux as the chief of all thieves. The Black Hills held profound significance for both white settlers and Native Americans, albeit for vastly different reasons. For the former, they were a source of immense gold wealth. The Black Hills held profound spiritual significance for the Sioux, as they regarded this region as their ancestral homeland. According to Sioux belief, it was from the Black Hills that they emerged from the earth in ancient times. The Treaty of 1868 had guaranteed the Black Hills to the Sioux indefinitely. However, this agreement was disregarded by the government during its actions in 1876. The encroachments on their territory, coupled with unbearable conditions on the official reservations, exacerbated by the corrupt practices of federal agents that led to widespread famine, fostered discontent among many young warriors. Some opted to leave the reservations for good, while others roamed the land during the summer hunting season, returning only for winter provisions. These individuals aligned themselves with Native Americans who had consistently rejected the ways of the white settlers and remained committed to their traditions. Among the most prominent figures in this movement was Sitting Bull of the Hunkpapa Sioux. Although not a chief in the traditional sense, he was a spiritual leader supported by notable warriors such as Crazy Horse and Gall, his adopted brother. Sitting Bull was recognized as the paramount chief of the Indians gathered at the Little Bighorn, having never surrendered to the white settlers or negotiated the relinquishment of their lands. He was esteemed for his unwavering commitment to his Indian heritage, and as a leader of the Hunkpapa Sioux, he also represented one of the largest tribes present at the Little Bighorn. In Native American culture, leadership was not determined solely by the size of one's tribe. Rather, it was based on the recognition of one's abilities by fellow chiefs. This reflects the democratic nature of most Native American societies, which were organized in a manner that emphasized collective decision-making even at the tribal level. Crazy Horse emerged as a prominent leader of the Oglala Sioux during the battles surrounding the Little Bighorn in 1876, not due to his relatively young age of mid-30s, but rather because of his exceptional military skills, which were recognized even by members of other tribes. Following the rejection of a meager offer to purchase the gold-rich hills in 1875, the U.S. government resolved to address the so-called Native American problem through a campaign of extermination. On December 6th, an ultimatum was issued, declaring that any individuals outside reservations after January 31st would be deemed hostile. Many Native Americans chose to resist and disregarded this ultimatum. As the deadline passed, General Sheridan instructed his commanders on February 8th to prepare their forces for action against an enemy that had been labeled hostile by default. Sheridan believed that a significant number of Native Americans were concentrated in the Bighorn Valley, potentially numbering over 1,000 warriors, particularly in the camps of Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull. He envisioned a coordinated winter campaign to encircle them. However, only General Crook managed to mobilize his troops before the arrival of spring. During the harsh Montana winter, Crook attacked a small camp along the Powder River before retreating. Most Native Americans successfully fled upstream to other encampments, while some succumbed to the cold, injuries, or exposure. This raid signaled the Army's intentions, prompting Native Americans to unite for mutual protection. The social structure of Native Americans was organized around tribal affiliations, with distinct tribes such as the Sioux, Cheyenne, and Arapaho, each led by their own chiefs and war leaders. Within larger tribes like the Sioux, smaller factions such as the Hunkpapa and Oglala existed, each with their own leadership and military commanders. The army that assembled on the banks of the Little Bighorn in 1876 comprised various tribes, including the Arapaho, Cheyenne, and Sioux. Although Sitting Bull was recognized as the leader by the community, he held no formal position of authority. This situation illustrates that Native Americans on the Northern Plains united to confront challenges as circumstances dictated. Often, it was simpler to evade the pursuits of white settlers and military forces by dispersing into small groups and retreating into the hills. However, the ability to unite for warfare proved advantageous. A comprehensive campaign against them was scheduled for the spring. General Crook was set to advance from the south with a contingent of over 1,000 soldiers. Colonel John Gibbon, leading 450 men from his Montana column, would depart from Fort Ellis in the west. Meanwhile, General Terry's Dakota column, consisting of 925 men, would approach from the east, including Custer's 7th Regiment. On June 21st, Terry convened a meeting aboard the steamer Far West to further elaborate on his strategy. He planned to deploy Custer's cavalry as a mobile tactical unit against the so-called hostiles, who were believed to be encamped along the Bighorn. Terry anticipated that the various columns would coordinate their efforts. However, the challenging terrain and inadequate communication suggested that such cooperation would be difficult. Consequently, his written orders to Custer contained a provision granting him independent command. The department commander expressed considerable confidence in Custer's enthusiasm, energy, and capability, preferring not to impose strict orders that might hinder his actions when nearing the enemy. In essence, Custer was afforded the freedom to adapt his tactics as necessary. His reputation as one of the Army's most seasoned and celebrated Indian fighters contributed to this trust. Custer's supporters often overlooked his flamboyant demeanor and distinctive style, as he consistently delivered successful outcomes. Custer also embodied the romanticized image of the American hero. His bravery bordered on recklessness, and his singular focus on achieving victory defined his character. Unlike a pragmatic soldier, Custer's romantic ideals resonated not only with those who influenced his career, but also with journalists and the general populace, contributing to his widespread popularity. However, General Terry's strategy was in disarray, as evidenced by the situation on the far west. General Crook's forces had already engaged the hostiles at the Battle of the Rosebud on June 17th. Earlier that month, the Sioux and Cheyenne had conducted their annual Sundance ritual, during which Sitting Bull experienced a vision of soldiers falling dead in a camp. Inspired by this powerful vision, the Indian war chiefs resolved to confront the advancing Crook. Although the battle resulted in only minor casualties, Crook was unsettled by the strength and aggression of his adversaries, prompting him to retreat to Fort Fetterman in search of reinforcements. This decision effectively diminished the campaign's combat force by half, while the warriors celebrated a significant victory, bolstering their morale and confidence. Unaware of these developments and dressed in his buckskin suit, Custer departed with his regiment on June 22nd. In an unusual move, he sought to mend the divisions and rivalries within his officer corps by formally soliciting their input. This approach contrasted sharply with his typical arrogant and autocratic demeanor, which had alienated some of his men, particularly Major Marcus Reno, his second-in-command, and Captain Frederick Benteen, the senior company commander of the regiment. Custer was not particularly well regarded by either Reno or Benteen. Both men were his seniors in age, yet they held lower ranks. It is likely that our understanding of the events at Little Bighorn is influenced by the perspectives of those who documented it, including Reno and Benteen, who were among the survivors. Their testimonies may not have favored Custer, as it served their interests to portray him as a reckless leader who ignored the counsel of his scouts when launching an attack on such a substantial village. Consequently, while Custer may have been admired by the common soldier, he was likely less popular among his junior officers. Nevertheless, there existed a group of steadfastly loyal officers, including Custer's brother Tom and his brother-in-law, Lieutenant Calhoun. As Custer advanced with his Arikara and Crow scouts, he determined that the camp was located on the lower Bighorn River, contrary to Terry's belief regarding its position in the upper reaches. He also realized that his presence had been detected, eliminating any chance of surprise. Therefore, the need for improvisation arose. Custer would first reach this area on the evening of June 24th at a location known today as Davis Creek, near the current community of Busby, Montana, situated directly east of the Little Bighorn battlefield. He would establish a camp there that evening and convene his officers for a meeting. Numerous individuals present that evening expressed the possibility of relocating their camp to establish closer contact with a village believed to be situated in the vicinity. Although the precise location remained unknown, it was generally assumed to be located in the valley of the Little Bighorn. This area lies approximately 7 miles along the ridge of mountains known as the Wolf Mountains, visible in the distance. Here, Crow and Arikara scouts would observe the village, which was situated 14.5 miles from their vantage point on the valley floor, where a battle would later ensue. On the morning of June 25th, the scouts gazed down into the valley, 14.5 miles away, and the Crows, relying solely on their keen eyesight, noted the movement beyond the hill, likening it to writhing worms. An estimated 10,000 to 14,000 horses could be seen in that valley. As Custer attempted to survey the Native American camp from Crow's Nest Peak on the morning of the 25th, he devised a strategy consistent with his previous successes and those of his predecessors. During this period, when chokecherries were ripe, the hostiles had gathered in significant numbers in the valley of the Little Bighorn, which they referred to as greasy grass. The camp comprised over 1,000 teepees, including encampments of Cheyenne and Sioux from the Oglala, Minneconjou, Sans Arc, Blackfoot, Brule, Two Kettle, and Hunkpapa tribes. The followers of Sitting Bull, representing the spiritual core of the resistance, were situated to the south of the camp, while the Cheyenne were positioned to the north. Custer, relying on his scouts for intelligence, was less focused on the enemy's numbers and more concerned about the potential for their escape. The primary military objective was to decisively defeat them. Experience indicated that the well-trained cavalry, armed with the latest rifles, would easily overcome the Native Americans, many of whom were equipped only with bows and arrows. The indigenous peoples were at a disadvantage in terms of supplies compared to the white settlers. They faced shortages of weapons, ammunition, horses, and other essential war materials. While they could acquire some resources through trade, the availability was consistently limited. In many instances, they managed to procure weaponry by defeating small groups of soldiers and seizing their arms and ammunition. Indian victories typically stemmed from the overwhelming numbers of warriors confronting a small contingent of white soldiers. If a sufficient number of white soldiers were deployed, it was believed that the Native Americans would be unable to achieve victory. Custer, ever the self-promoter, ensured that the anticipated triumph would be well documented, as a newspaper correspondent accompanied the regiment. Consequently, Custer decided to take the initiative and launch an immediate attack on the camp. He divided his regiment, leading a battalion of 5 companies to the right, while Major Reno commanded 3 companies in the center, and Captain Benteen maneuvered to the left. This operation was intended as a reconnaissance in force, with orders to engage any opposition encountered. Benteen followed Custer's directive to advance in the left oblique. Reno and Custer advanced toward the marshy area, where Custer had issued the command for Reno to launch an assault on the village from the south, with the assurance that Custer would provide support. This division, lacking adequate intelligence, is frequently regarded as Custer's critical error. It is argued that a unified regiment could have led to a successful outcome. However, Custer's primary objective was to prevent the escape of his targets during the attack. To address this concern, he employed established tactics aimed at mitigating this risk. In this context, their approach mirrored a scaled-down version of General Terry's strategy. The pressing nature of the situation necessitated adaptability, and Custer's plan appeared to be well-founded. As they progressed along both sides of what is now known as Reno Creek, the right and center units converged and advanced together toward the solitary teepee location. At this juncture, Custer received intelligence indicating that approximately 40 hostiles were fleeing, or as the interpreter, Gerard, described it, running like devils. Custer's tactics were entirely conventional for the period. However, his failure lay in the inability to adequately modify his strategies to align with the unique conditions of the northern plains.